Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at SpellBoost Rune. This is the deck that carried me through to 4-0 in the weekend lobby tournament. So I did give a spotlight to this deck yesterday in the video covering the best decks used during that tournament, and turns out, I mean, this deck did phenomenally well for me. I went 4-0 pretty handedly, only a couple of close matches that we are going to get into, but overall this deck has also been carrying me through the upper A3 rank pretty handedly as well, with close to a 66 to 70% win rate roughly from based on my recording, so not too bad at all. Really performing well. While you can push for Ruler Kakaitis OTKs, you're more often than not pushing for a potential Kun OTK. Well, maybe not OTK, but anyway, you're pushing for lethal with Kun more often than not, so we'll get right into it and take a look. So these matches were all taken from the weekend lobby tournament. This is the first match. It was ended up being a Rune mirror match for round 1.
Medium rare.
Going 4-0 was definitely not something I expected to do on my first weekend lobby tournament, but we got pretty nice matchups overall. So first match here, starting off with a pretty average hand. If you can get Anna and Grey and Declimb, you're usually pretty well off. A couple of low drops to go with it is always nice. And we end up with Trouble Seraphic Tidings. The enemy basically mirrors here, dropping Miss Miranda. Having the mirror play isn't too bad here. We can go for Tidings, getting more cards. And then we kind of just play off this. So we have our 2-drop lineup here with Miss Miranda and Ruby. We're able to drop both pretty handedly. Go for what we need to do. Get some more cards. I end up throwing one of the draw engine cards away because, hey, we've got enough draw engine at this point. We're only going to hit more as well. And I'd rather start developing board. They go for the full clear here, which is definitely not a bad play. And we're pretty well off now. We have our Seraphic Tidings play because Anagram just isn't really necessary right now, and I want to try and get a few more spell boost cards before I drop the Anagram. They're going for a bit of a rainbow play with True Summons. There are about 3 or 4 variants of SpellBoost Rune as well. They're all slightly different early games typically, with the same late game objective. This variant obviously being the one that runs Rainbow and Summon. So they go for their own Anagram. I didn't end up using Evos. I try and conserve my Evos where I can here, because if I can conserve Evos, we're going to be ahead in the long run, especially dealing with their potential Super Evos later. That tends to be how I play out most of these matches. If I can avoid having to Evo as often as my opponent, then I can do big late game swings that are just really hard for them to be removed. So they go for another Anagram, which actually sets us up pretty nicely here for our own again. And we can actually get a little bit of damage to the face as well, putting them on a lethal clock, along with Blaze Demons being almost active. We actually end up in a very, very nice spot overall. So this is a board they have to deal with now. And Storm is a good way to do it. We're just looking for some more draw cards. They go for a heal and a declimb, looking for even more cards. They end up finding the Storm, but having to spend the declimb, not great for them. And there's another Anagram play, so they end up getting a lot of their Anagrams out. Thankfully for me, it's not really a big problem. We can deal with this pretty well. We have our Kun as our option here, which is pretty decent. So we drop Kun. We go for its Super Evo play. Finding a way to remove as much of this as possible is actually pretty tricky. This is probably the worst board I had to deal with. It was definitely a board where I had to potentially declimb out of. I was like, is there many other choices that I have here? I end up dropping the Blaze Demon and end up going Demonic Call instead. Fortunately, just within my play point range to drop those, which means I didn't have to use declimb yet. We see another Kun from our opponent on turn 9. Fortunately, no turn 10 Kuns. Saves us a lot of hassle. And now he just goes for the pretty easy clear here. but they've wasted all their Super Evos, all their Evos, and they have one card in hand. Really doesn't leave them with a lot of options. I end up going for the Earth Sigil play with these Sage Lights, since I can easily declimb out of this. All I have to do is find some way to do 2 damage, which is pretty feasible from where we are. We end up finding it pretty nicely. We can actually go Kun here. This will allow us to just push for lethal at this point. So we can get that 10 damage to face, +1 off the Super Evo'd Kun, and then we can drop a Blaze Destroyer into the back line there and set up for next turn, especially when they only have 1 card in hand. The odds of them having a full clear here is extremely low. They do it up with homework time though, so they do get to draw a little bit more, but ended up not finding anything and just passing, allowing us to strike them in the face. So round 1 opponent, pretty easy knockout overall. We had pretty much full control of the entire game and wasn't too much trouble. So going into our second match, we end up seeing a Mecha Portal player. We do end up going second, I believe, almost every match. Second is insanely powerful going play for Rune. Honestly, that's probably what gave me such a large lead to begin with, was the fact that going second is just such an impactful thing to do, especially in these early metas. So not looking at too much here. Unfortunately, no turn 1 or turn 2 play easily. Rune makes up for that a little bit, getting something to play on turn 2. And then Stream of Life kills it, and they do a little bit of damage. They end up going for not too much from here on out. It's really like turn 4 plays aren't too devastating from Rune, so we can't really do a lot to impact the board on our next turn. Not without expending our extra play point for the Anne and Greyer, of course, which is what we end up doing since we have both. Because at this point, there's no point not dropping it. We're stacking our hand pretty hard. We've got some good spell boostable cards. We can clear this pretty handedly and set up 6 damage on board. So, we're waiting on our opponent to make a play. They end up fusing to the Striker artifact, making an artifact Y, which makes perfect sense. They're looking for a way to pretty easily clear this. Unfortunately, on its own, it wouldn't be enough, so they do end up just Bullet or Beyonding. And we can just drop Anne and Greyer again if we'd like, but I do end up going for the Ruby instead. Since they don't have anything on board that I want to actually deal with, I decided to just go for as much setup as I can, try and draw some more cards and look for that declimb again, which we end up finding a second one of, along with Kun, which is a very nice card to have this early. So they end up setting up with a removal. Not great, but it's fine. We actually don't need to do anything. These things kill themselves at the end of the turn, so we can just wait them out. Fortunately, not having any heal is a bit brutal, because we don't want to get put in a spot where we're going to lose. So they go for the Runecraft, dealing the 5 damage, killing off our ward, and then killing off our 4/4. Does leave them on just 1 health though, so we have about a 50-50 if we pop just looking, but we could also use Stormy here to make it 100% for a 4 board clear. We end up going for Ruby again. Ruby to dump Ruby. We don't really need 2 Rubies, so just looking for more cards at this point. End up going Stormy, and then we end up going for the draw. And we have a pretty decent chance to go for healing here, so taking it now doesn't seem too bad. Putting ourselves back to 19 health. We head out our opponent's turn. They're going for another fusion, setting up A. So they've got nearly, I think they have every card now. Alpha, Beta, Sigma. Not Sigma, Gamma, sorry. They have all of them, so now it's just stalling them out and forcing that play so that they don't have anything left. So I end up going for the Kun, which is pretty easy to do here. We set ourselves up pretty nicely with these declimbs along with the Demon. We can easily wipe this board out without too much issue. And get as much damage to face and try and set up a nice board. They go for Ralmir, not a surprise, this is why we have Williams in the stack. I've come around pretty heavily to these Williams. They are quite nice for dealing with both aggro sword style decks and rune decks and other bloody big decks like Haven. Anything that's kind of a problem with big followers, William does a good job of multi-clearing. So we just go for as much as we can here, since we are going to be able to drop Declimb next turn. Committing as much to the board as possible to potentially put a lethal down. They end up going for the Mecha on turn 10. This will heal them for 5, wipe most of the board except for the Blaze Destroyer, and hit me in the face for 13 with Super Evo. Puts us just 2 out of lethal range. Definitely a huge risk, but not the end of the world. We can actually start doing some stuff here. I end up going for the Kun, since this does give us lethal if we can clear that 13-13, which we only need to find a total of 7 damage to do. So we go for our Declimb, looking for any way to remove this, and fortunately we don't really find too much, but the Anangrea does help. I was really disappointed. I didn't really find a way to full clear this without sacrificing a card. But we did find a little bit of healing, which now is pretty decent. It means you don't get killed by a single beta play. Force them to have double beta, which they shouldn't really have, given that they already made the mecha. So it shouldn't be easy to summon 2 betas and make them at the same time. Really sad I couldn't find lethal though. We got the Kun play and we got the Declimb. If I had have drawn any damage card, I would have cleared the 13-13, basically. Well, I guess Stormy wouldn't do it because it does have protection, but this will be more than enough to win our game, and that takes round 2. We took it pretty handedly, although it was a close game. Now, going into round 3, there's another portal deck, although this one is Puppet Portal. So round 3, this was one of the few matches where I was like, ooh, this is not good. Puppets can do a lot of damage, they can do it fast, but if you can burn them out for their turn 8 and turn 9 Orcus plays, then usually you can take victory. The problem is getting enough damage to them before that. We start off with a pretty nice hand though, and a decent draw with another foresight as well. So we do end up with a couple of good spell boosty plays early, especially with Stormy now. That really rounds out our hand quite nicely. The only thing we're really looking for now is a Anangrea and some draw cards. If we can get those early, we should be good. We end up fighting Seraphic Tidings, perfect top deck. We actually got really good RNG here, especially getting Anangrea for turn 4. The only turn that now is a little awkward is turn 5. But we have pretty decent removal, we have a pretty stacked hand. It really is just finding good plays. So we have the Blaze Destroyer we could drop on 5 now that's only a 3 cost. Our Declimb is down to 11 already, nice spot to be at this early. And our Kuns are in a pretty nice spot too. They'll make really good turn 6 plays if we need them. But again, I don't like to overcommit my Evos if I don't have to. Especially in this kind of matchup, where a big Evo play could kind of win us the game. So we end up getting more draw, which is more than fine, and then we just drop the Blaze. Especially since they didn't end up leaving anything on board, Blaze seems like a pretty solid play here. Our first Declimb is now at 10, which does put it in playable range. Since now it's at a play point cost, it's actually doable. They do end up Noring here, which is a nice way to clear, but we're making them burn as many of these puppets as possible. I end up just going for the Kun play. We do have to commit an Evo though if we want to easily clear this, but it does leave up an entire board that will probably force them to have to Evo back. So I'm not too worried about doing this. Plus it allows us to get that 5 damage, which is just a nice amount, as it does mean if something sticks to board, we can easily Kun lethal. So they go for the Sylvia. Pretty decent clear. I now need a pretty good way to clear this. We do end up just dropping a William and going face, getting that little bit of extra damage we need. Medical Grade Assassin getting dropped, Love Strike Puppet, so no Orcus play yet. But it does seem like they're trying to set up for it at some point. That or they just didn't end up getting it yet. It really was just me trying to wait it out while clearing as much of the board as possible and trying to get my own lethal. Anangrea gets to actually see the light of day this time. We did have to free up some hand space though. And I ended up declimbing. Might not have been the right choice, but I ended up making that decision anyway. which I think was fine, because we were so stacked on cards, I just didn't really want to have to deal with it anymore. And I wanted to try and commit more to the board now that would either force out the Orcust play, so that we could hopefully clear it, or potentially just set up as many cards for lethal as possible. That's the alternative. And this is a pretty good board to have Orcust come down on, since they are going to kill both our wards, which they don't have to do normally. But if they want to deal with the rest of my board, they do have to clear. So it forced out a lot of the damage and made them use both their super evos now. And William is just a free kill off here, along with Sage Light for more healing, getting us back to 19. Especially with no super evos now, it's going to be very hard for Orcust to actually take the game from me. The only real hope they have is if they can get to the mecha for big damage swing, but at this point, they're in a pretty bad position. I was hoping the 5-5 would stick because the Kun was actually lethal there. But they do end up going for the heal. I end up dropping the Kun anyway. I decide, hey, we're just going to commit to this play then. Especially since we don't really have many good options from here anyway. So getting the removal plus damage is good. And it should be, outside of Medical Assassin, which we've already seen I think 1 or 2 of, it should be very hard for them to actually clear this without super evos. So we see Puppet Lancer and then Noah. That's a pretty decent way to get around it. It does open up some options, but they do decide, hey, it's not worth it, and end up conceding. I guess they just couldn't quite get there. And on to our final match here. It is against a Dragoncraft. So, both me and this Dragoncraft player at this point were the only 3-0s in our lobby. We were the only ones to win a full 3-0 matchup. So that means whoever did win this game was going to take the 4-0 title for our lobby. Which, I mean, there is, what, 9 teams, 18 players, right? You had 9... 1 to 9, I think. Positioning. Initially. So we go for the Ruby. I end up just throwing Cocytus back. It's too early for Cocytus anyway. And we're sitting on Anangrea and our decent draw engine. So Seraphic Tidings becomes a pretty nice play here. We're set up ready for turn 4 Anangrea, turn 5 Anangrea. And we end up with 2 Blaze Destroyers. Not too bad at all. So this was more of an aggro dragon with a little bit of ramp included. You do see these variants occasionally, so I'm not surprised that we saw one of these now. This gives me a pretty easy clear. I end up using an Evo on it. Mostly because I know what aggro dragon wants to do. So setting up bodies that they have to answer is more important than actually keeping our Evos. But this time, not really as big a risk. I don't need to spend another Evo on this. I don't want to put myself too far behind. So we end up just clearing it with the ward. They do finally enter Overflow. They drop their Apollo, which isn't an easy full clear here. But that does give it to them, really. But at least it cost them. We now have Looking Smart, which is good removal. And Miss Marina for the extra spell boost. Getting our Flame Destroyers out on turn 6. But still not having a Kun to play yet. They end up dropping this Olivia, which, yeah, honestly is a little annoying, but not the end of the world. Olivia on its own doesn't allow them to clear both Flame Destroyers, unfortunately. Since the Evo only gets them to 4 damage, so they can't wipe out both. Means we're going to get a pretty nice damage turn off this if we can full clear without using the Blaze Destroyer. And Kun would usually be a pretty good answer to this. But I end up just going a different route. Keeping the Kun in our back pocket here. Especially since we're going to put him very close to our lethal range. And we had plenty of ways to do damage. So I wasn't too worried. I end up sending the normal Evo on the Blaze Destroyer, getting that 10 damage, putting them in lethal range of Kun since we're only basically 1 full turn away. Next turn we don't get there, but the turn after we do. We do see the Gyaru come down though, and this is something I have to deal with now. Kind of annoying. Especially when they get the barrier on the 5-2. It's like, come on, now I have to deal with you. We do end up with Mirinda and William being a pretty good option though to full clear here, although it will cost us a Super Evo. But it does set us up with some kind of board and a decent way to full clear. So we were still at risk of losing, but this was probably the closest one. If they had a Forte play here, plus any kind of damage storm, we could have been at risk of dying. Any big storm also would have been really dangerous, but I think I kept us just out of range of most decent plays. It would have had to be complicated. So the heal wasn't going to be enough no matter what. Healing to 11 just doesn't keep you out of range of the Kun if you leave up any bodies. But they end up leaving up the 5-5 anyway, so we had a very easy lethal from here. We didn't really need to think about it at all. So while it was close, and we were at risk in that last turn, leaving up the 5-5 and letting us just Kun them ends up giving us a free win. So overall, I was really impressed with this deck. It performed well past my expectations overall, securing me the 4-0 for the first weekend tournament. It's nice to be able to say that we aced that first tournament, which is really cool, especially with Rune, one of my favorite decks. SpellBoost Rune in particular being definitely one of my favorites overall, and given that this deck is now performing extremely well in the A rank plus category, I'm having a lot of fun with it. We didn't end up seeing really much sword play, which is interesting given how good that deck typically was. But hey, we did alright. I was expecting to do worse, and again, winning 4-0, I can't be disappointed in this deck at all. I highly recommend playing this deck if you have the legendaries for it. This variant in particular, I've bounced between about 5 variants of this kind of deck, and this one so far has been the most consistent for picking up wins, so hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and until next time, I'll see you then.